Tonight, a win for the government. The High Court rules a company linked to the former Conservative peer Baroness Mone should repay more than £122 million. PPE Medpro, owned and run by Michelle Mone's husband, supplies the NHS with gowns during the pandemic which were not up to standards.
This is an independent decision from the High Court, and I'm pleased with their decision because they should never have got their hands on this money.
The Chancellor's claiming she'll get the money back. We'll explain why that doesn't sound likely. Also tonight, the Prime Minister sits down with our political editor, Beth Rigby, at the Labour Party conference and tells her he doesn't think that Nigel Farage or Reform voters are racist. As for Reform themselves, they're furious with the PM for his speech yesterday, accusing him of inciting violence. I'll be speaking to the Deputy Leader, Richard Tice. And as conference in Liverpool packs up for another year, we'll ask who's been the biggest conference winner. Ranil Jayawandanan and Luke Sullivan get to spend a whole hour with me, so on that basis alone, I'm declaring them as our winners tonight. It's Wednesday. I'm Darren McCaffrey, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. A very good evening. Now, tonight I want to take you back to May 2021. COVID restrictions were still a big part of our everyday lives. Social gatherings and bubbles, funerals and weddings restricted in size, foreign travel, frankly, almost impossible. It is a time we'd all rather forget. But in the midst of that chaos and the frantic attempts to find a vaccine, in May 2021, rather incredibly, the National Crime Agency was launching an investigation. An investigation into whether companies were providing substandard equipment on an industrial scale. Now, one of those companies was PPE Medpro. It was owned by a consortium led by Baroness Mone's husband. Today, they were ordered by a court to repay a whopping 122 million quid to the government after many of their surgical gowns did not meet standards. But the PPE Medpro were maybe a lightning rod, but they were far from alone, because that £122 million is frankly only a fraction of the £1.4 billion that the Treasury believe taxpayers are owed. And 5 years on, people are still angry, very angry about this. I think we've almost forgotten how lots of voters are still flipping furious. They believe that some business leaders spotted an opportunity in the midst of a pandemic to leverage their political contacts, often with great ease, to get onto the so-called VIP fast lane. Many had never even made masks and gowns before. But what they did make is millions and millions of pounds in profit. Today, for some of them, they're claiming to be the victims. It is not a wonder then that the embers of public rage are still red hot. Because despite today's judgment, it's not clear how much of that money will ever be returned to the Treasury. Indeed, the government have already admitted that more than 700 million quid is unlikely ever to be recovered. It is a national scandal, and it's one that very much hangs over our politics today. Let's get more detail on that court ruling today with our business and economics correspondent, Paul Kelso, who now reports.
It's May 2020, the first wave of COVID-19 has hit, and the NHS is scrambling for PPE. In the House of Lords, a Conservative businesswoman, Baroness Michelle Mone, sees an opportunity. Using her political contacts, including former Minister Michael Gove, she recommends a company set up by her husband to a VIP fast lane for PPE procurement. PPE Medpro won more than £200 million worth of contracts, but 25 million sterile gowns were unusable. Almost 5 years on, the High Court has ruled the company was in breach of its contract and must repay £122 million. COVID family campaigners welcomed the ruling.
Really pleased. It really needs to be. It needs to have happened. That PPE and that money spent while we lost our loved ones and we couldn't visit our loved ones because there wasn't PPE to visit them while they were dying. And they've profited from this. They shouldn't have profited. They've taken taxpayers' money, and it needs to all be reclaimed back.
The couple reacted furiously, insisting they are the victims. On social media, Baroness Mone called the ruling an establishment win, and in a statement her husband Doug Barrowman said it was a travesty of justice. But a Labour government that pledged to pursue COVID profiteers was quick to celebrate.
This is an independent decision from the High Court, and I'm pleased with their decision because they should never have got their hands on this money. And during the pandemic, people made huge sacrifices, separated from their families and loved ones, and yet at the same time, people like Michelle Mone and her company, her husband's company, profiteered on the back of that misery.
For almost 3 years, Baroness Mone and Doug Barrowman denied any connection to PPE Medpro, while she continued to share their luxurious lifestyle online, only admitting their links after they were revealed by journalists. If this ruling is clear, getting the money back may not be. Doug Barrowman and Michelle Mone have admitted making more than £60 million in profits from PPE Medpro's COVID contract. But a day before this judgment was handed down, the company filed for administration with assets of less than £700,000. The judge has given it just 2 weeks to pay in full, and the Department of Health here has instructed lawyers to try and help it recover every penny. The National Crime Agency is also investigating PPE Medpro's COVID deals, and some of the couple's assets, including bank accounts in the Isle of Man, have been frozen. Michelle Mone, the lingerie entrepreneur who reached the Lords, remains a peer, but still faces a standards investigation. Hers a tale of rags to riches, accumulated at the taxpayer's expense. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
Well, over the last few years, one of the voices driving the campaign on COVID contracts and that VIP fast lane was Julian Mone. He's a barrister and he's the director of the Good Law Project. And I spoke to him a little earlier. I suppose my first question is a very simple one, which is, what's your thoughts on today's judgment? I mean, it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. It would be very nice if the public purse received that money. I think the prospects of the public purse receiving that money are pretty low. So lawyers like to talk about the corporate veil. That's a characteristically pompous lawyer's way of saying that limited companies are called limited companies because their liabilities are limited. It's very, very difficult to trace through monies that a company has paid, in this case by way of dividend, to Doug Barrowman and recover it from Doug because that pierces the corporate veil. The hurdle to do that legally is very, very high, and I rather doubt that government is going to get much or any of that 122
And this is interesting because there was a possibility, I think, earlier on in this case that they could have done, but decided to push for the rather larger sum of money. Why do you think that was? Is this more about a symbolic victory, about sending a message, rather than the actual money involved?
Well, I mean, Labour came to office on the back of some very strong promises to go after those who had benefited from, and indeed those who had delivered the VIP lane. And what we've seen since Labour took office is much more modest. As I understand it, and I had a very good source at the time, Labour was talked out of a proper COVID corruption inquiry by the Cabinet Office. Cabinet Office, of course, had administered the VIP lane, so you can well understand its motivation. And what they ended up with was a temporary, part-time, semi-retired civil servant, a very nice guy, but with nothing like the sort of resource that you would need if you really wanted to go after the VIP lane. I mean, the other thing that's really, really important to note here is that if you're a business and government is offering to give out, in essence, free money, it's kind of logical, right, to join the queue. And we shouldn't pretend that if we were running businesses, we would do anything different. The wrongdoing here, the real wrongdoing here, is by the people who gave out the free money to their politically connected friends.
Well, I mean, the argument, I think, we heard this during the kind of when the Conservative government were in power, is that it was in the midst of a pandemic, it was the most unusual of times, and their main effort was on trying to have enough PPE to save people's lives. And in the end, if someone was willing to do that or said they could, then the government effort was to operate on that basis. and that actually it should be the moral duty of someone in the midst of a crisis for a country to do the right thing rather than something that might come terribly easy. Let's not focus on the politics of it, we can, though. Just in terms of what the obstacles are here, though. I mean, the government are still trying to recover more money. I think it's over £1 billion in total. They've talked about 1.4 billion. And they have made some progress. We should note that, haven't they, in recovering some money?
So there were a couple of announcements, I think, at party conference for various different sums. One, I think, was for 400 million, another was for 1 billion. I haven't seen what those numbers are made up of. I suspect very, very little of it is in relation to PPE.
But the government are making strides. What are the legal obstacles beyond, obviously, public limited companies? What are the legal obstacles that are preventing... is this also quite difficult to prove in many cases?
No, I don't think it's especially difficult to prove, but there are a number of legal hurdles. Limited liability, we've already talked about, is one of them. I think that some of the particularly problematic contracts were settled. Disputes in relation to them were settled by the last government, and if that's true, then it becomes very difficult for a new government with different political priorities to reopen those settlements. Very often, because we bought so much PPE, very often we never inspected it before we incinerated it. So we don't know whether what they delivered was compliant or not. I mean, I have to gently push back. I don't think the points that I'm making are political points. I do think that people are entitled to expect that a government in a moment of crisis will buy PPE from the right people rather than from their friends. And if they had bought PPE from the right people, then we wouldn't have this enormous surplusage of unusable PPE like in the Mone case.
But, I mean, obviously, again, the government at the time, and they made this case, is that the whole world wanted PPE. There was a massive demand for it. This wasn't just something confined to the UK. And the UK government were having to operate in an environment in which trying to procure that was going to be increasingly difficult. I think we all know that. But there are arguments around whether the due diligence in place was enough. And that's I suppose my next question is, we are where we are. They are trying to recover, of course, some of this money. What do you think needs to change so this doesn't happen again, frankly?
So I would very much like to see more resource for this unit. It's a very, very small unit. And I also think, and I'm sorry to labour a point that I know you don't really want me to put.
No. I'm very willing for you to put it. I'm just trying to give the response of what maybe the people who aren't here to defend themselves would say in response.
So the really important point here is that if politicians are if under the supervision of politicians, civil servants are giving contracts to those who are politically connected, and there are no consequences for the politicians or the civil servants, then there is very little disincentive for future administrations to do exactly the same. So the answer to your question, how do we stop this again, is we attach consequences to people giving contracts. And every single thing you said about Conservative Party's explanation for the difficulties in buying PPE, I agree with. I don't disagree with a single word. But you still have to answer the question, why was it these people with political connections?
So to go full circle then, back to Michelle Mone, I mean, she has suffered consequences. I mean, not least of all in terms of reputational damage. I mean, the Chancellor of the Exchequer today was suggesting that she should be removed or indeed hand back the fact that she's a member of the House of Lords. So I come back to my question is, maybe this was much more of a symbolic victory about sending that message today.
I think that's right. I mean, if I'm right in my speculation that although government is making a lot of noise about chasing this money, its prospect actually of recovering any of it is very, very modest, then you're in a world in which Michelle Mone has been castigated in the national press for a number of years, but is tens and tens of millions of pounds richer. I mean, she might well think that's a trade-off worth making. And of course, she is only one of the hundreds of people who won PPE contracts, and there have been very little consequences for anyone else.
Indeed, and we're not getting necessarily the coverage that she and some others are.
No.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, as you heard there, Jolly was making some claims. We put those to the Cabinet Office tonight and the extent of its inquiry into COVID contracts. This is what they've said, that the COVID inquiry was launched by the previous administration and there's a full statutory inquiry. Now, we're just going to, and we'll bring you more on that, of course, and indeed the Cabinet Office response a little later on. But we are going to bring you that breaking news in the very fact that Jane Goodall has died at the age of 91. The primatologist was known for her groundbreaking studies of chimpanzees. We're told that she passed away due to natural causes. She'd been in California as part of a speaking tour in the United States. And a statement on her Facebook page confirmed that Dr. Jane Goodall, a UN messenger of peace and founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, had passed away. She was, of course, as we said, very famous for drawing global attention for many years to the plight, particularly of chimpanzees and the dwindling populations, as well as warning against environmental destruction. So just to update you on that breaking news is that Jane Goodall has died at the age of 91. Very sad news indeed. Someone that revolutionised science, was a tireless advocate for the protection and restoration of the natural world, and has died in California at the age of 91. OK, let's bring you back to politics and return to that story about COVID, those contracts, that court decision today. We're going to be speaking to our panel in just a second, but first let's bring in Paul Kelso, as you can see, who is next to me here. And Paul, what's fascinating about this is the government are making a genuinely concerted effort to try and get some of this money back, but it's far from clear that that's going to be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. In this case, when it boiled down to this case, hugely high profile, as you were discussing there with Jolly Mone, this case, Michelle Mone and her husband, Doug Barrowman, has a disproportionate amount of attention on it compared to the amount of money in the greater scheme of things that was involved because of her high profile. Frankly, because she and her husband denied it for so long. There were very clear trails of breadcrumbs from his companies to PPE Medpro, but they denied it and denied it and denied it. And in a sense, I suspect the Department of Health has rather followed the excellent journalism that helped expose their links, which they could have cleared up immediately by admitting it, in bringing this case. The case itself is boiled down to some pretty complex contract law, but of course it has symbolic resonance, as you've been talking about, because they made a very great deal of money, more than £60 million they've admitted, that they made from these deals, total 200 million in total. Some of the PPE they provided worked, and they've claimed victimhood as a consequence. The challenge here for the Department of Health is that while they've admitted making that money, it's not in PPE Medpro, the company which is the subject of this action by the department, filed for administration yesterday, the day before the judgment was handed down. Worth remembering, it was only incorporated the day before Michelle Mone recommended it to the PPE VIP lane. And in the company, there's £666,000. That is a long way from £122 million. And the Department of Health isn't saying it's engaged lawyers to try and get back every penny. They're not saying much else, I suspect, because they don't want to prejudice any action they take. But it's really unclear as to where the money will come from, despite the fact that Michelle Mone and Doug Barrowman have admitted that money they profited from, and some of it is in family trusts from which they and their children will benefit. Given those circumstances, it's no surprise that it's a lightning rod, this case, for public anger. OK,
as you can see, our panel, Luke and Ranil here, are with us in the studio. Luke, let's start with you first. I mean, I called it a kind of national scandal at the top, and I think it is in the sense that I think we've underestimated the kind of public anger about this. It still kind of gets brought up, actually. People do remember this fact. But what's your sense of what's gone on today and where the government are? You know, they are trying to get this money back, but as Paul was saying, it's proving really, really quite difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think people will just be seeing this story and are extraordinarily angry that people profited over COVID, where services were provided and contracts and the PPE wasn't of the quality. I think, as Paul has said, it's got all the ingredients that it has become the lightning rod of this whole issue. I think the government actually will be very happy that this is back up in lights. I think it was interesting that Rachel Reeves had done a statement from what looked like the Downing Street Garden, basically saying we want our money back.
Yeah, I mean, she mentioned it in the speech last year and this year at Party Conference.
And it's been a long-running campaign, actually, of hers. I remember when she was Shadow Cabinet Office, before she was Shadow Chancellor, and it was an issue she was raising during COVID. I think, ultimately, the government will be, happy that this story's back up in lights, and I don't think there'll be any problems every time they say, give us our money back. We're going to try and go through the courts to do it.
And this does cast a shadow, doesn't it? Particularly over what went on at that time. As you saw in that interview, there is an explanation for some of it. There was a desperate attempt to get PPE, but, I mean, even at the time, but certainly in retrospect, it was very badly handled.
Well, clearly...
More than maybe badly handled.
Clearly, in hindsight, there are all sorts of things during COVID that would have been done differently. Let's be really straightforward about that, yes. However, as we heard, and this is no defence of what Baroness Mone has done, and the courts have ruled independently of all politicians, and actually, as an aside, I do think it's helpful to keep politics out of this, because this is a legal process, and that's what...
Well, there was politics involved.
Well, no, hang on. So, irrespective of what Baroness Mone has done, the truth is, at that moment in time, in March 2020, people were, good civil servants, were themselves looking around for how do we source the nitrile gloves, how do we source the aprons, how do we source all sorts of things that hospitals needed across this country. So no defence of what has been found to be wrong, but it's important to remember some of the context. And that's not a political thing. Yes, ministers preside, ministers are accountable, yes, I agree, but there are plenty of really hard-working, decent civil servants who are doing their best across government to keep people safe.
You called her Baroness Mone there. Should she remain as Baroness Mone?
I understand there's also an independent... And again, I want to... I'm not in politics anymore. There's an independent...
You do sound like a politician, though. I don't want to preempt the findings
There is an independent process going through in the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards to look at...
Instinctively, what's your gut say?
Well, I think she should certainly herself withdraw from the House of Lords. I think that would be the thing that she herself, on her own honour, should do after what has been found to have been entirely wrong. Contractually speaking, the contract was in place to guarantee the right level of product. The products delivered were not of the standard that was required. The CE mark was not properly accredited, and therefore she should take accountability for that.
And look, it's not a surprise that obviously Labour are trying to make hay with this, because, as I say, it does resonate with voters. I mean, Rachel Reeves got some pretty loud applause in the hall with that. Where does it go, though? Because, Labour have kind of taken this so far. They are trying to claw the money back. It's clear they're not going to get it all back. But do they just keep hammering this in the hope that it's still going to harm the Conservatives?
I think they genuinely think there's some money there to be recouped. And, look, in the grand scheme of what was spent on COVID by the Conservative government on things like furlough, because they had to, step in, it's not a lot of money. But it's... £100 million for something.
It's the principle.
It's the principle.
I accept that. Yeah.
And it's public money, and people expect it to be spent effectively and well. And I agree with the point you said. COVID was a unique situation, and government was trying to do its best at times. But I think, this encapsulates, some things where the government clearly cut corners.
And Paul, just finally for you, where does this go next? Do we have any real sense of the government's... I mean, I think Rachel Reeves talked about 400 million quid at the Conservative Party conference, but what do we think about where this goes next? Obviously, the question like National Crime Agency still involved, the government's still involved.
It's going to continue to rumble. I mean, the very short term, PPE Medpro has got 14 days to pay this money. We've already discussed they, on the face of it, don't have that money. There's one option open to Doug Barrowman and Michelle Mone is they took those profits out. Perhaps they could offer to repay them as a sign of good faith. Worth pointing out that in June, when this was coming to court, they offered to settle for £23 million, but that money has now been taken off the table, so perhaps that's still there. It will continue to run, I think, as you mentioned, the National Crime Agency. It has frozen £75 million worth of their assets, companies, bank accounts linked to Mr Barrowman and Michelle Mone, and they are continuing to investigate. That could get even more serious, but in general terms, plainly, the government want to make a lot of noise about every case they can recoup money, but the Barron and Mone do point out they are, at this point, the only people who've been pursued in court in this manner for breach of contract.
OK. Paul, thank you very much indeed. Paul Kelso there. And this will feature, of course, in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening, looking at tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. They will be with Kevin Maguire and Adam Bolton. What a duo. Do tune in from 10:30 tonight. One other thing I almost certainly will be talking about, of course, is the Prime Minister Labour Party conference, because Sir Keir Starmer has insisted he does not think that Nigel Farage or his supporters are racist. The Prime Minister sat down with our political editor, Beth Rigby, before the Labour Party conference in Liverpool wrapped up this afternoon, and Beth challenged him over his comments he made in that main speech yesterday, in which he said that the Reform UK leader hates Britain. Here's Beth.
The Prime Minister in Liverpool fighting back. How are you feeling?
Good.
Yeah? And with a clear opponent in his sights.
Prime Minister, do you admire Nigel Farage as a politician?
I think he's a formidable politician, and of course, I think he's the opponent as we go into the next election.
Drawing his battle lines against Reform UK, taking aim at Nigel Farage's plan to deport people who currently have indefinite leave to remain in the UK.
I think the policy is racist. I think it's immoral. I think that's a very dangerous place for us to go as a country, and it goes against everything that I believe in.
Do you think Nigel Farage is a racist?
No, nor do I think Reform voters are racist. They're concerned about things like our borders. They're frustrated about the pace of change. So I'm not for a moment suggesting that they are racist.
Do you think that he is caught in racist with this policy?
Well, look, I'm not going to start bandying...
well, you called it a racist policy.
The policy...
So is he caught in racist?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into labelling the man. I'm talking about the ideas and what he stands for.
A Prime Minister who wants to take aim at Farage, but not his supporters, as he looks to close the growing gap between Labour and Reform, and trying to walk the line too when it comes to President Trump.
Donald Trump said under Sadiq Khan, London is being driven towards Sharia law, is it?
No, of course it's not.
Okay.
That's nonsense.
Isn't it that racist as well?
Well, it's nonsense.
Isn't it
nonsense.
racist to accuse a Muslim mayor of driving London to Sharia law?
I'm not going to start down the road of discussing whether things said by others are racist or not.
Well, you just discussed Nigel Farage having a racist policy, so you literally are discussing that.
I have been really clear that the idea that in London we're introducing Sharia law is rubbish.
Is it racist?
It's rubbish.
Does it not bother you when he says things that you know are not truthful and you won't actually call it out?
Well, what matters to me is that the relationship between the US and the UK on defence and security and intelligence is the closest relationship in the world. It is what helps to keep us safe in this country. And therefore, of course, I work closely with the United States President. Of course, I have a good personal relationship with him.
The Prime Minister confident he can weather the storm.
Prime Minister, you will lead Labour into the next general election.
I will lead Labour into the next general election.
Keir Starmer came to Liverpool to answer his critics, finding passion and purpose as he pitted his version of Britain against that of Nigel Farage. This a dividing line that has united the party and given the Prime Minister some much-needed momentum. He set the battle lines into the next general election, but the much bigger and harder task is delivering on the renewal he says Britain so badly needs.
The Labour government leaves Liverpool in stronger voice and brighter spirits. But the bigger landscape bleak as the party eyes a difficult budget and elections ahead. Starmer's battle only just beginning. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Liverpool.
Well, earlier I spoke to Reform's Deputy Leader Richard Tice from his constituency in Skegness. He told me that he thought Sir Keir Starmer's speech had given licence to what he described as the masked thugs and Antifa to target his party's leader. Have a listen to this interview. Richard, very good evening to you. I suppose my first question is, clearly you guys are quite angry, I might suggest, about what the Prime Minister's had to say this week. What are you actually angry about?
Well, the fact that he's essentially given licence to the far left, the likes of the masked thugs Antifa, to essentially come at us, come at Nigel Farage. He literally used the words arms, take up arms and attack, go for the enemy. I mean, just the most extraordinary language. If we use that sort of language against our political opponents, I mean, we'd have had the police knocking on the door, for heaven's sake. It's just outrageous and totally unbecoming of a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
But at the same time, Richard, I mean, this is the rough and tumble of politics, isn't it? I mean, look at what some people inside Reform have said in the past, what the President of the United States has said in the past, stuff that you've agreed with. I mean, this language is battered around all the time, isn't it?
No, it's not actually. Not suggesting that you take up arms, particularly at a sensitive time just a couple of weeks after Charlie Kirk was brutally assassinated, and just 2 weeks after Nigel's security has been downgraded by 75% by the government. So, yeah, frankly, this it's just completely inappropriate. And yeah, you know, this is supposedly the kind and compassionate bunch on the left. Well, far from it. These are the masked thugs, now led by a Prime Minister, it seems, who is inciting violence against his political opposition. Well, it's disgraceful.
I'm sure that is not what the Prime Minister would say he was saying. But Richard,
it's literally what he said on his speech. He said, "Take up arms against the enemy."
Elon Musk, what do you think about him? And he had to say at that rally in London just a couple of weeks ago. I mean, talked about civil war in this country.
He didn't, and I said that was inappropriate language. I mean, fine, we believe in free speech, and yet there's rough and tumble. But there is such a thing as there's a difference between free speech and inciting violence. And as far as we're concerned, the Prime Minister crossed the line. That's a matter of judgment. That's our judgment. And let me tell you and your viewers, if anything happens physically to any of our Reform activists or elected councillors, frankly, I will hold the Prime Minister personally responsible.
Yeah, but people in the past talk about fighting racism. They don't literally mean it, Richard. You know this. I mean, by the way, there's been 20th century language used. So, Richard, but by the way, so Nigel Farage once said, any normal and fair-minded person would have a right to be concerned if a group of Romanian people suddenly moved in next door. Why? I mean, that in many ways.
That's not saying take farms. I'm sorry.
But Richard, you honestly literally think the Prime Minister
literally suggested he gave licence to Antifa yesterday to take up arms. He incited violence. He is responsible personally for anything physically.
I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't think the Prime Minister intended that way, or any right-minded person would think that they literally meant taking up arms.
I'm just telling you, those are the words he used. So if anybody does take up arms and breaks the law, he is personally responsible. And he would hold us to account if we use that language. It takes two to tango.
But language does matter. I mean, that's an argument you would make, even in a country with free speech. I mean, have you been concerned by some of the statements? I make the point about Romanian people because, you know, language has been... If you're a Romanian person in this country, you might feel uncomfortable with some of the language that's been used by members of the Reform Party, previously UKIP and Brexit before. And by the way, it's not just Romanians, but other groups as well.
It's a daft point. We haven't said take up arms against your political opponents. That's what the Prime Minister said, and he will be held to account for it.
OK, just on security, do we know the reason why Nigel Farage's security detail has been downsized?
Well, I tell you what, why don't you ask that question to the Prime Minister? Seems a bit coincidental to me. A couple of weeks ago, the security gets downgraded, and then you have a Prime Minister that incites violence against Nigel Farage from the far-left thugs, the Antifa lot.
You're genuinely suggesting there is a conspiracy here to somehow harm Nigel Farage from inside Downing Street?
I'm just telling you, we are absolutely furious. And this is, yeah, we're just very, very angry with the Prime Minister of this country, who's making us all poorer and is now inciting violence against his political opponents. And it's a coordinated attack with the other cabinet members, one of whom suggested that Nigel Farage had flirted with the Hitler Youth. Absolutely shameful, disgraceful.
Indeed, I mean, we're trying to find here in the speech, what is the direct quote, Richard? Sorry, I haven't got the Prime Minister's script in front of me. What did
I've got better. That's what he said. He used the words enemy and he said he'd take up arms.
Yeah, but it obviously matters in context. I mean, I could use the word enemy
here.
Yeah,
the context was that he was having a brutal verbal assault against Nigel Farage and Reform. That's the context. It was, by the way, the context of most of his speech, the context of most of what he's been saying in recent days. Look, we're going up in the polls. He looks ridiculous, but regrettably, we do live in a more tense, anxious time, partly because of some of the hopeless things that this government has done, and people are very angry.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we know that David Lammy did some row back on the Nazi point. My producer has found the quote. Apparently is that those who are the enemy of national renewal, essentially that we should fight them. That just sounds... Because they're an enemy of national renewal. That sounds like... But people use the word fight and taking on their enemies in politics all the time. You and I have been around politics for a long time. That's quite a stretch, I would suggest here, Richard.
No, I don't suggest that at all. That's the language, and you've just reaffirmed that I'm correct in...
Well, we haven't found the word arms.
Our fury at what this Prime Minister is doing. He's giving licence to the likes of Antifa, and we're not having it. We're not having it. We're calling it out for what it is. He's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, right? He's not the head of some group of thugs around the street corner.
Do you think that you or Nigel Farage has made other people uncomfortable in the past, potentially incited people to be racist or xenophobic in the past? You don't think anything you've said or Nigel Farage has said over the years has done that?
I certainly hope not. I don't think so. And I've never used the sort of language that the Prime Minister used yesterday in his speech that I can recall.
There you go. That was Richard Tice speaking to me a little earlier. Lots of shaking of heads during that interview, and we'll get the response from the panel in just a second. But let's get the response to what we had around Nigel Farage's security, because the House of Commons has said that decisions about protection are subject to a rigorous risk-based assessment, but they don't get into arrangements for specific MPs. And the Home Office on this have said decisions on MP security are made independently of ministers. You'll also have heard my to and fro going back and forth there with what the Prime Minister actually said during his speech. As I made clear, I didn't have his speech in front of me as I was conducting that interview. But for clarity, here is what the Prime Minister had to say.
Let me say this, because whilst we must come together to fight reform with everything that this movement has, we must go into that battle armed, not just with words and condemnation, but with action. And that means tackling all the problems that they prey upon.
So there is the direct quote. He did say about taking up arms. Many people would not take it literally, but Richard Tice and others are furious that some might. And isn't that kind of the point, Luke? I mean, does Richard Tice have a point that, you know, words matter in politics, and sometimes they, even if the Prime Minister, and he clearly didn't mean it literally, but can get misconstrued?
I mean, I was watching that interview, and it was one of the most extraordinary 6 minutes of an interview I've seen from a politician. It was an absolutely ludicrous argument. I think, as you've just shown in your clip, Prime Minister is talking about a battle of ideas. He's talking about, you know, we have to take up arms, and talking about the context of fixing the problems in the country that are leading to Reform doing well in the polls. I think this is a ludicrous argument they're trying to manufacture here. Words do matter, and they raise some really important points in the sense of, sadly, in the last 15 years, we've seen a number of MPs either murdered or serious violence against them, and there is an issue about MP security. But I think to liken what the Prime Minister has said in a rhetorical flourish to you know, the charges that Richard Tice was making, I think it speaks for itself that it's frankly ludicrous.
Well, I take what you say, Luke, and take it a step further, which is that, you know, actually it could be said that now both Sir Keir Starmer and Reform have just taken to slinging mud at each other. And, you know, I think everyone should be careful with the words that they use. And rather than hurling insults at each other and complaining about what each other has said, it'd be far better to focus, for everyone to focus, including the Prime Minister, on solving the problems facing the people of this country. Just one aside, I do think there is something to be looked at around security of members of Parliament and of ministers. Again, these things are looked at independently, but my own personal gut feel is the balance is not right, not only for this one particular member of Parliament, Nigel Farage, but actually for many others because of the sad deaths that we've seen of Joe Cox and Sir David Amess. So I think there is a problem there. But actually, this is not about that. This is about hurling of insults to just shy away on both sides, including from Labour, shying away from the big problems facing this country. He could have used the speech to set out a plan on how he's going to get the economy out of the mess it's in, how he's going to avoid the tax rises that are now undoubtedly going to be hiking on people across this country, and he didn't. He instead chose to hurl insults.
Well, I'm glad you're using this platform to get those key policy areas across. But there is a point here, is that Labour have spent a lot of this week playing the man and not the ball, haven't they? They've deliberately made a concerted effort to go for Nigel Farage. And, in politics, it should be a battle of ideas, not necessarily about one man. I mean, I dread to think how many times Nigel Farage's name was mentioned on that platform stage this week at Labour conference.
I think what you've seen this week is the government, from the Prime Minister downwards, trying to set the choice that will face this country in 3.5 years' time, which is between Keir Starmer and a Labour government and Nigel Farage. And I think it's a fair challenge. I think what the public want to see is the Labour government getting on and delivering. And I think that's what we saw this week in a number of the speeches, was Labour cabinet ministers getting to grips with governing and getting on and delivering. I think there is an audience for these speeches, and I think that part of the speech probably was for the party hall. And it is a 20-second clip in an hour-long speech. I think, frankly, I think if I was being cynical, I think Nigel Farage and Reform don't want to talk about their policy on indefinite leave to remain, and therefore have sort of blown this issue up because they'd rather have a row slanging match than talk about their policy.
Just very finally on this, though, may I also suggest, if Nigel Farage was mentioned a lot, that one person who wasn't mentioned a lot was Kemi Badenoch and the Conservative Party. Isn't that a bit of a worry for you, that whether it's the Lib Dem conference, whether it's the Reform conference or Labour conference, the party that's not mentioned is the Conservatives?
Well, I think there was some analysis done of showing all the different cabinet ministers and who was talking about whom. Yes, Nigel and Reform got a lot of hits. There were plenty of hits about the Conservatives. But the point is, Kemi and her team and my former colleagues who are in Westminster, they're just getting on with the job of coming up with a fresh plan that's going to solve those problems on the economy, which Labour has no answer to.
They do seem, I have to say, we're not spending them. They do see a little bit of a political irrelevance at the moment. Now, maybe in part it's because, as you say, the Conservative Party are working through policies after a massive defeat to kind of get things right.
Yeah, look.
Or maybe it is that actually they're just not in the political picture anymore. And if that's true today, it might be true in a year, 2 years, 3 years' time.
Well, the British public decide these things, of course, and that's part of being in a democracy. Yes, it was the worst result that the Conservative Party had ever had. Worse than 97, worse than 1906. Yeah. It was a terrible result, so let's not pretend otherwise. And so, yes, we are adjusting. My former colleagues are adjusting to being in opposition. But the important thing in opposition is not just to hurl abuse at each other, as is happening with Nigel Farage and Keir Starmer. It's to actually work on the solutions that this country needs. And so, I hope, and we'll see what happens next week at the party conference for the Conservative Party, that there will be some clear policies outlined as these are some of the solutions we think should be brought forward. And if the government wants to nick them, then brilliant, because then we'll have done our job.
Maybe even some unity too. Just very funny on this, look, is it also fair to say, though, now that actually for the Labour Party, they're talking up for reform because that's the battle they actually do want to have? In essence, they feel that it's a greater dividing line than with the Conservative Party, and that there's a kind of political expediency here, maybe for Labour to make it into that battle. Just by the way, it was also true for the Lib Dems to do exactly the same the week before.
Yeah, I think the Prime Minister and the government are reacting to where the polls are, and the polls have shown consistently for the last year or so that reform are the major electoral test. Now, whether or not that's where we get to at the general election, time will tell. It's in the government's hands. The good thing that is going for the government is a general election is 3.5 years away, and they have time.
We're looking at the current polls, I mean,
they're in power and they can govern. And I think what we did see this week was the government actually starting to, get used to being in power. I think there were some teething problems in the first year, and doing things. And ultimately, they will be judged come the election on whether they've delivered.
Teething problems.
That's an understatement. Master's understatement there. I mean, the fact that one of the first decisions was to take away the winter fuel allowance, taking away the right of farmers to pass on their land to their children to produce good quality food for our country. The fact that now the Prime Minister and the Chancellor can't deny that they're going to hike VAT. I mean, these aren't just teething problems.
Okay.
This is the theory of opposition colliding with the reality of government.
Well, gentlemen, the great divide between Labour and the Conservative Party is at least very alive in this studio, if not necessarily in the rest of the country. OK, you're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, with that Labour Party conference done and dusted for another year, we're going to be looking at who potentially was the declared unofficial winner amongst the fringe events, the bars, the restaurants in Liverpool. I mean, there is a massive clue on the TV right now, but we'll be talking more about the Home Secretary after the break.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, 7 members of an Asian grooming gang are jailed for a total of 174 years. Also ahead, the company linked to Baroness Mone is ordered to repay £122 million of taxpayer cash over faulty PPE sold to the government during the COVID pandemic. And tributes tonight to the British zoologist Dame Jane Goodall, who has died at the age of 91. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
Enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We're being crushed. Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, the Labour Party conference wrapped up today with delegates dispersed, complete with those hangovers and pockets full of receipts, and they headed home, essentially, to put the wash on. put their clothes in the washing machine, or the dry cleaners, I suppose, for all those MPs. But the accepted view, I think, is fair to say that Keir Starmer gave a pretty good speech and has probably done enough for now to quieten down the discord within the party. That's until at least the budget, which is 2 months away. But the Prime Minister may have had a good enough conference, but the chatter in the conference bars and the back rooms was actually about someone else. Have a look at this.
And I begin by thanking a rising star of the Labour movement, the former Justice Secretary, now Home Secretary, who did so much to lift our country out of the prisons emergency that we inherited, Shabana Mahmood.
Some may describe me in the coming months as a tough Home Secretary. Perhaps that is true. But let it never be forgotten that I will be a tough Labour Home Secretary. Above all else, one thing has been clear to me at this conference. We know the scale of the challenge that we face. We know that working class communities across this country are calling out for change. That change is underway. Yes, change takes time, but change is coming. And together, I know that we will renew this country. Thank you, conference.
Now, my director has just pointed out that we spent the whole of last week talking about someone called Andy Burnham. He seems to have disappeared pretty quickly back to his mayorship of Manchester, because we are talking about Shabana Mahmood, the new Home Secretary, potentially emerging somewhat as a favourite. John Craig, as you can see, is with me in the studio. John, you've been at conference all week. And she's been talked about as a rising star for a while here in Westminster, but given her new massive role, someone that's getting a lot more public recognition.
Yes, since she was promoted to Home Secretary, that's when it really started and really took off. That last clip was her speech closing conference, normally done by the Deputy Leader, but of course there's no Deputy Leader at the moment. Angela Rayner was much missed, as Wes Streeting said in his speech, we want her back, we need her back. But in that speech, closing the conference, the reason she was doing it, she's just been elected chair of the National Executive. So that's another endorsement from the Labour High Command, as I'm sure Luke would agree. She said this, actually, which was quite fun. She said, we're a family, a little dysfunctional at times, perhaps, but a family just the same. Well, I suppose the relative on the naughty step was indeed Andy Burnham. I mean, this idea that he was going to challenge, there was all talk 3-4
I mean, a week
days
is a
ago.
long time of politics,
Well,
but my word, that went up and then it went down very quickly.
It bombed, yes. I mean, first of all, you had Andrew Gwynn, who's talked about quitting. No, I'm not quitting. Then the veteran Graham String. No, I'm not quitting. And you said he left conference. He was seen skulking out of the conference centre just in the minutes before Sir Keir Starmer's big speech on Tuesday.
And John, you were only disappointed because you wanted another by-election to cover.
Well, we like it. We do like it. Let's talk about Shabana Mahmood, though, because she did impress. And she was... I mean, the other politician I'd say had a good week was Wes Streeting was good. Mm-hmm. Good speeches from him. And he was the life and soul of the Mirror karaoke party last night in the early hours. Actually, Shabana Mahmood was there. I didn't see her singing. But
I was going to say, John Craig obviously wasn't there either.
I was. I know, I'm joking. She was. It was a fringe meeting where she was asked about her. Do you want to be leader? She was asked. She said, "You shouldn't believe anyone in politics who says they're not ambitious about the top job, because they're basically lying to you." So,
well, I mean, she is honest. Yes. She is honest.
That's a yes.
Gentlemen, yeah. What do you think?
Oh, look, there's no doubting Shabana is an absolute star, and the clip of the video you used of her conference speech, she gave 10 minutes of telling a Labour Party audience some real difficult home truths on some really difficult issues, and she did it in a really articulate, thought-through way. And look, she is a talent, and I think we've already seen in the first 2 or 3 weeks since she's been Home Secretary why she's so highly rated.
What would the Conservatives think of her? Because, I mean, it's pretty clear that she's going to be a tougher Home Secretary, if you like, and, I mean, that... frankly, not good news for you guys, is it?
Well, it's great news for the country. That's what the country needs. And if she's going to deliver on what she said she's going to deliver on, brilliant, because that's important for everyone here. But I do think the point made about Andy Burnham disappearing, that's one thing. But we've seen today a rather sort of unnecessary bust-up, perhaps, but a bust-up nonetheless, in respect of that deputy leadership election. Bridget Phillipson and Lucy Powell going head-to-head, some choice phrases said, and that does show that there is disunity.
You must be quite enjoying this, because it must remind you of what it's like inside the Conservative Party.
Sadly, we have been there.
You recognise it when you see it.
Absolutely.
What happened was they had hustings. When that closing speech, that was about 11:30, and then after that, they had hustings. I wouldn't quite say behind closed doors, because journalists were allowed in to listen, but they wouldn't allow the TV cameras in. And yes, that is shaping up to be quite a battle. The winner will be announced on the 25th of October, so there's a few more weeks of that yet. Yes, indeed, you've got the leadership's candidate, that's Bridget Phillipson, of course, backed by many cabinet ministers. Then you've got Lucy Powell, sacked by the Prime Minister in that reshuffle that the more I heard at Labour conference, clearly did not go according to plan at all. But would she have stood for the leadership if she hadn't been sacked? I doubt it. I doubt it.
A close ally of Burnham, of course, as well.
Yes, indeed. MP for Manchester Central.
Well, just talking about Andy Burnham, I mean, I don't think it could have gone any worse for him. I mean, he really misplayed it. Like he's done it in the past so many times. Just to end on this, though, can we say Keir Starmer has had a good week and he's certainly solidified his position?
He came to the conference needing to buy himself another 6 months at least, and he's done that. But that's a low bar, right? And so let's see what happens at the budget, because the country, and indeed his parliamentary party, may turn against him. It's no wonder Rachel Reeves wants to, turn the taps on again on benefits and so on, which won't be popular with so many hard-working people across the country.
Just very briefly.
He's stabilised the situation. I thought he had a good week. He came out of it much stronger than he went in. The test is going to be, can they maintain that momentum and deliver on the things they've talked about? And that's going to be the test.
OK.
Kemi Badenoch might be out before Keir Starmer.
We have to stop. We have to stop. We've run out of time, I'm afraid. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. John, thank you very much as well. Just about recovering, I think, from Labour Party conference before he heads to the Conservatives. That is it from me on Politics Hub for tonight. Matt Bobbitt will be back here tomorrow. Do join him for that. Sarah J. Mee is up next with the UK Tonight. From me, for now, good night. See you soon.